I'm going to pass it on to Jaya to see if there are any questions and also to introduce the second half of the summit.
Thanks, Anu. It's so nice to hear from the senator and council member. At this time, we don't have questions, so I'm going to go ahead and move us on to the second part of our program. So as Anu mentioned, the youth have been working on this initiative for over 8 months now, and it's really been my privilege to be a witness to their process. So initially in February, I was there along with another colleague to provide support as the youth began delving into these important topics. And since then, I've had the opportunity to meet several times after that with the Youth Board and the Youth Council to continue processing and identifying coping strategies also during these unprecedented times. So I'm excited to be here to see the culmination of their work and just their dedication to destigmatizing mental health in our communities. So our first presenter today is Cameron Pollywell, who will be talking about depression, self-harm, and suicide. And if there are questions that come up from Cameron's presentations, please just chat. There's a chat function that you can just say, you can pick my name and send questions to me. So Cameron, I'm gonna pass it on to you.
Hi, thank you so much, Ayanti, for passing it on to me. And yeah, if you guys have any questions for her, you can just click the little arrow next to all panelists and scroll to her name, and we can answer any questions that you ask her in the chat. I wanted to say before I start my presentation, I think earlier we had intended to play the the year in recap video that Atul made. So I think before we start all the presentations, I'm gonna give Atul a chance to play the video, and then we can get into the presentation. So Atul, if you wanna share your screen. All right, thank you so much for that, Atul. As you guys can see, we've been working on projects like this throughout the whole year. And I just wanted to reiterate, as Anwanti mentioned earlier, today the Youth Board just hit our goal of raising $7,000 to donate to NAMI. So I'm really proud that we were able to accomplish that. And thank you again, Atul, for putting together that video. But yeah, I'm going to get into my presentation now about depression, self-harm, and suicide. And for all of the resources that we have and that we've gathered for the specific topics that we're talking about, Nikhil is going to put a Google Doc in the chat so people can click the link and access all the resources that we talk about later on. But yeah, so my group focused on depression, self-harm, and suicide. So I worked alongside Trisha, Anish, Harsh, and Ria from the youth board. And I worked alongside Rohan, Pranay, Veda, and me here from the youth council. So depression is a fairly common mood disorder, and it creates severe symptoms that affect your mood and the way that you feel. There are different types of depressive disorders, but some common symptoms of depression are an overall pessimistic outlook on life, a constant feeling of hopelessness and anxiety, and a decreased level of energy, which can lead to a change or a shift in the way you do your daily activities, such as eating and sleeping. And these can lead to more drastic changes down the line if people develop, destructive habits, or people develop habits that they're usually not used to with their normal routine. So as you can see here, there are different types of depressive disorders which affect different parts of people's mood. For example, bipolar disorder, where you constantly switch between manic and depressive states, or seasonal affective disorder, which is something that affects lots of people without them even realizing it, and without them realizing that it actually has to do with a different time of the year and how that affects their mood. And so there's lots of different types of depressive disorders that affect different parts of your emotions and different parts of the way that you feel. And so these depressive disorders, without being treated, without people having access to resources, if they go on for long periods of time, this can lead to self-harm. And that nearly 17% of teens have harmed themselves because teens overall have a harder time coping with depression and have a harder time getting access to those resources that could help them in their situation. The average age of onset, or the first time someone deliberately harms themselves, is 13. And as you can see here in the image, 90% of people who engage in self-harm at any point in their life started when they were a teenager. So for the youth especially, self-harm is a super prevalent issue that can be stopped and that can be prevented earlier on, but it all depends on how well we provide resources and help to youth who are feeling depressed, and how, as we're doing now, how much we can reduce the stigma on mental health disorders and allow them to be able to reach out to people in their community and get help for themselves before the situation turns into self-harm or turns into anything worse. And some signs are that for people who deliberately harm themselves, the majority of people use blades or razors to harm themselves or cut themselves, and they may wear baggy clothing or clothing to hide the scars that they have on themselves from their self-harm. So if you know someone who has been in a depressive state for a while, or someone who may appear to be depressed and suddenly starts to wear long sleeves or sweaters during the summer, or there's just some obvious signs that they may be harming themselves. And so one key fact about self-harm is that people who deliberately harm themselves are 3.5 times as likely to attempt suicide. And so, as you can see here, it's sort of a spiraling downward effect. If depression isn't treated early enough, people can harm themselves, and those who suffer or those who deliberately harm themselves are much more likely to attempt suicide. Now, suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as you can see here in the graph, suicide rates have increased over time, especially in the last 10 years. And in the last 10 years, they've increased drastically amongst youth. It's currently the 2nd leading cause of death for people ages 10 to 34 in the state of Washington, and suicide rates are continuously on the rise for teens and young adults, not only in the state of Washington, but in the United States as a whole. The suicide rate climbed 56% for people between the ages 10 and 24 in the last decade. And so this is a really prevalent issue, and something that more and more people are experiencing because more and more people are unable to have or feel like they're unable to have access to resources, and feel like they're unable to feel like they aren't able to talk to professionals and medical professionals who can help them cope with their mental and emotional state. So some risk factors of people who may be or who may have a depressive disorder, or who may attempt to deliberately harm themselves, are that they could have experienced a traumatic event during their childhood, such as someone close to them or a family member harming themselves or attempting suicide. Also, hostile school environments are something that youth suffer with a lot in terms of bullying and feeling pressure at school and not being able to have someone to go to talk about what goes on at school at home. this applies to adults as well, especially in work environments. If you have an abusive relationship with your boss or with your employees and you feel like there's no escape, lots of adults tend to feel a loss of sense of purpose, and people often, don't know why they're doing what they're doing anymore and start to question, their daily activities, like I said. So they may start skipping school or not showing up to work just because they want to avoid what they experience there. And this ends up resulting in social isolation and loneliness, which just perpetuates the issue. So withdrawal from friends and family is a warning sign, like I just said, for people who are at risk of harming themselves or who have a depressive disorder, because they don't want to spend as much time with people that support them, or they won't want to spend as much time with people who they usually spend time with. They want to isolate themselves. And usually this is, or in some cases, this can be due to the fact that people are turning to drugs and alcohol in order to instantaneously feel better or elevate their mental state. But in the long run, it really perpetuates the issue and creates worse habits and can lead to addiction and things that ultimately make their mental condition deteriorate their mental condition far more, as well as violent or rebellious behavior, or things that people wouldn't necessarily do, or people that if they tend to start skipping school a lot, or they tend to start spending much less time with their friends and family, it's a clear sign that someone may be depressed or at risk of harming themselves. Now, the good news is that we've put together a list of resources such as the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which has access to tons of resources for people with various depressive disorders, or people who are experiencing deliberately wanting to harm themselves or at the risk of suicide. And they can lead you to medical professionals who focus on behavioral therapy, as well as who can prescribe FDA-approved medications to people who suffer from these disorders. And again, you can check out these resources in the link that we're posting in the chat. But yeah, thank you guys for coming and listening. And I'm gonna pass it on to the next presenter.
Thank you, Cameron. That was very informative. And I just want to add, as a therapist and as a parent, if you find your child struggling with any of these things, coming from a place of curiosity, calm, and connection is so important. And also as a parent, to not stigmatize it too, right, and problematize it. So just adding that piece there of what we can do as parents to be supportive. The curiosity piece of what is the child trying to communicate through self-harm. Self-harm is often about communicating pain too. So just wanted to add that piece. So thank you again. Our next presenter is Disha Shah, and she will be talking about anxiety, panic attacks, and bipolar disorder. Disha, are you ready?
Yep. Hi everyone.
Great.
My name is Disha, and I'm presenting my group's research on bipolar disorder, anxiety, and panic attacks. So we had 3 teams help put together this presentation. The YL research team is Anya, Pranav, Kayan, Sachit, and Liam. The YC research team is Ishan, Akash, Shivam, Vanilla, Arav, Nihar, and not pictured, Tanush. And the YV research team is Jay, Kavya, myself, and Arav. So the general definition of bipolar disorder is that it is a mental illness with 3 main stages of dramatic shifts in a person's mood, energy, and ability to think clearly. Before I get into the details, I'm going to show a quick video about bipolar disorder.
Think back to an exciting moment in your life. Maybe it was your wedding, the birth of a child, or getting that dream job. What about the most depressing moment? The loss of a relationship, or death of someone important to you. Now, imagine fluctuating between these highs and lows, like riding a roller coaster that feels never-ending. Welcome to reality for over 10 million Americans living with bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder is a chronic mental illness that causes dramatic shifts between manic highs and depressive lows, affecting a person's mood, energy, and ability to think clearly. An individual with bipolar can seek help and take control of their own mental wellness through a mixture of traditional medical treatment and holistic health activities. Free education, information, and support programs are available. You are not alone. We can help.
All right, now that you have a general preview of bipolar disorder, I'm going to give you a little more information about the disorder. So there are three main symptoms of bipolar disorder. They're ranging from least severe to most severe. They are hypomania, which lasts for at least 4 days and is an emotional high. Next is mania, which is a distinct period of at least 1 week of elevated or irritable mood. This is also an emotional high. The last one is depression. These episodes may lead to developing symptoms of psychosis, and this is an emotional low. Some statistics about bipolar disorder are that it affects 5.7 million Americans age 18 or older, which is about 2.6% of adult Americans every year. However, 4.4% of adults experience this disorder during their lifetime. As you can see on the bottom right graph, the median onset of this disorder is 25, but it can start as early as in your childhood or as late as in your 40s or 50s. It is found all over the world in all genders, ages, races, ethnic groups, and social classes. And it also has an extremely high lifetime prevalence rate for people, especially here in the US, because 1 in 5 people with the disorder die by suicide. It is also extremely hard to diagnose because there is no specific test for it, so doctors have to perform multiple labs and physical tests to rule out other conditions before sending you to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Anxiety is an excessive and persistent worry or fear about everyday situations. Some common symptoms are feeling nervous or restless or tense, or having an increased heart rate. Many people mistake the differences between stress and anxiety, so here are some common differences. Stress is a reaction to external factors and is usually quickly resolved after the stressful event is completed. Comparatively, anxiety is a reaction to internal factors and hangs around long after the event is completed. 12.5% of Americans have or will develop anxiety. 2/3 of college students are overwhelmed with anxiety. It is most common among women and young adults, and there are more than 3 million US cases per year. Panic attacks are sudden episodes of intense fear that trigger severe physical reactions when there's no real danger or apparent cause. Some common symptoms, as you can see in the picture to your right, are sweating, increased and racing heart rate, hyperventilation, and even chest pain, which can cause some people to mistake it for a heart attack. Many people have 1 or 2 panic attacks throughout their lifetime. However, if you have recurrent and unexpected panic attacks, you may have panic disorder. 2.3% of adolescents had panic disorder in the past year, and similar to anxiety, it is more prevalent among females than males. There are many treatments for both disorders. As you can see on the left, there are plenty, but for both disorders, it is important to remember that there's no one treatment that works for every person. The most important thing to do is to contact your doctor to figure out what method of treatment works best for you. On the right, you can see some tips for coping with both that you can use at home. One example is simply stopping and breathing, and this can help ease some symptoms of both disorders. Social media has a complex relationship with bipolar disorder, anxiety, and panic attacks. It can make people who have bipolar disorder or anxiety feel overwhelmed and has a potential to make symptoms such as impulsiveness worse. It can also cause someone to develop more symptoms of anxiety and panic attacks. However, it also can help bring people together, and it can increase awareness and help people form communities with people like them. There are many resources for each of these disorders. For more information on each of these respective disorders, you can look up these websites, and they have general info as well as more specific resources on treatments and courses of action to take. You can also use the NAMI helpline listed above to talk to someone and to receive help. Thank you for listening, and these are my sources.
Thank you, Disha. It was very informative, and thank you for putting your resources there. Our next presenter is Nikhil Kagalwala on learning environment, culture, and academics.
Thank you for the introduction. So this presentation was put together by 3 groups. On YO, we have Akul, Shruti, Sanvi, Tejas, and Ashka. On YC, we have Divij, Himani, Millie, Ritu, Disha, Anika, Rishi, and Shivas. And on YB, we have Mahima Vadlamani, Mahima Oyar, Ananya, and myself. I will start by discussing 2 learning disabilities, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and dyslexia. Then I will talk about expectations in middle and high school. So this video introduces a crucial concept regarding learning disabilities.
We are all different, and that's wonderful. Some differences are easy to see. Height, hairstyle, gender, eye color, and so on. Other differences can't be seen. Our favorite foods, fears, or special skills. Interestingly, the way we see the world is also different. For instance, what do you see in this drawing? Most people see a duck, but some of you might have seen a rabbit. Whichever you saw, you are correct. This is just a trick drawing to show you that all brains work differently.
Now let's take that idea and let's apply to learning disabilities. If a person has a learning disability, there's nothing wrong or bad about them. Their brain is simply wired differently, so avoid being judgmental. Dyslexia is a general term for a disorder that involves difficulty learning words, symbols, and letters, but it does not have an impact on a person's general intelligence. Around 10% of people have dyslexia, so it is relatively common. And remember, dyslexia displays itself differently in everyone. To cope with having dyslexia, it is important to not compare yourself to others, to maintain positive self-esteem, keep learning, reading, and writing, and try different learning styles. It is important to reach out to others so they can help you as well. We edited this slide to show you how it feels to read with dyslexia. I'm going to talk about how to help someone who has dyslexia. First, change your communication style. The text on the screen might be confusing, but you can still understand me when I'm speaking. Second, focus on their strengths, and third, celebrate achievements. This goes for all people with learning disabilities. They tend to be harsh on themselves, so it is important to reinforce them. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, is a chronic condition that includes a combination of persistent problems, such as difficulty sustaining attention, hyperactivity, and impulsive behavior. 9.4% of children in the US have ADHD, and 1/4 are not receiving any treatment. So it is important to be aware of ADHD and its effects. To cope with having ADHD, understand what it is and that there are resources available to help you, and you are not alone. Write down thoughts and tasks as they pop into your head to stay organized and rely on someone trustworthy. To help someone who has ADHD, ask how you can help. Reinforce their strengths and complete tasks alongside them to keep them focused, and avoid being judgmental. I know my teachers in the past have given students fidget toys to keep them engaged. Here are some resources to learn more about learning disabilities. I want to emphasize that if you are diagnosed with one, your family, friends, and counselors are the best resources for you because they can personally help you. Moving on to the next part of the presentation, I want to clarify that there are multiple types of expectations, including parental, self, and academic expectations. Self-expectations are the most influential because it is how you perceive yourself, and you have the most control over that. And I want to make it clear that expectations are not necessarily negative. They can often motivate you to be the best version of yourself. In middle school, students begin to face academic pressure from their parents as they begin preparing for high school. They often struggle with self-confidence as they compare themselves to others, which puts a lot of pressure on themselves. In high school, students are under a lot of pressure to resume built for colleges. This stress can cause anxiety, depression, and an increased amount of substance abuse. Some statistics show that students in what are considered to be high-achieving schools are 2 to 3 times more likely to have anxiety or depression. And 3/4 of high schoolers report constantly being stressed. And this is often due to succeeding in their classes and in order to get into their top college. This is why self-care and looking out for your family and friends is crucial. Social media can have both positive and negative effects on teenagers in high school. Some benefits it can have are that it can help high schoolers find other like-minded teens, which can build them a support system. It also takes the pressure off of face-to-face interactions, and it can help them find new friends. However, social media can also create unrealistic expectations of what the body should look like. It can disrupt sleep schedules, and it can also cause people to expect a life that is similar to what is portrayed in movies and TV shows and what the lives other celebrities might be living. And this is why social media is good, but in moderation. Parental expectations are said to be one of the most important contributing factors to a child's success. Realistic expectations are said to encourage success, leading to better attitudes and overall engagement. However, unrealistic expectations can cause performance to decline, leading to anxiety, discouragement, and a lack of motivation. So it is important to find this balance when parents are setting their expectations for their children. Peer expectations can cause student behavior to shift in beneficial and harmful ways. Students can often motivate each other, which keeps them focused. However, peer pressure can cause a shift in how teenagers act. Some statistics show that 20 to 30% of adolescents report symptoms of depression due to peer pressure. And out of 297 interviewed college students, 1/3 reported that peer pressure was one of the hardest things they faced as a teen. To cope with all of these expectations and pressures, it is important to practice time management, take mental health breaks, talk to your family and friends for support, and the most important coping mechanism is to have a discussion with whoever is holding these expectations and tell them that it is negatively impacting you. And parents, as their expectations are extremely powerful, should frequently initiate this conversation with their kids because some kids might not be mature enough to initiate this conversation themselves. So it is important that you take charge and look out for your family. Here's some resources for expectations and pressure. I want to emphasize again that the best help you can receive is from the people close to you because they can personally help you. Here are the sources for the presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Nikhil. Yeah, with learning disabilities, I also want to say that there is a lot of gifts that come with it too. So I, in my practice, work a lot with people with ADHD, and they tend to be some of the most creative, lateral thinkers out there. So to see the positive aspects of it too is really, I think, important. The next presenter is Bonnie Jane, and they're presenting on eating disorders. Thank you, Bonnie. Are you ready?
Yes, hi, I'm Bonnie, as Jayanti mentioned, and our presentation will be on eating disorders. The YBs, YCs, and YOs who have helped create and research this presentation are Pranav, Saivi, Shrishti, and myself, Arav, Malika, Maina, Nandini, Sanjana, Shreya, Shrujana, Thara, Rohin, and not pictured, we have Arpita, Anika, and Nishka. The first eating disorder we researched was rumination disorder. Rumination disorder is a regular regurgitation of food, and those afflicted with this disorder do not seem to be stressed or disgusted. They reach through, re-swallow, or spit out their food. The side effects and symptoms of this disorder include weight loss and malnutrition, stomach muscle contraction, bloating, or heartburn. Rumination disorder can be triggered by a viral illness, emotional distress, or even a physical injury. And treatment for this disorder involves breathing exercises and habit reversal learned in therapy. Additionally, those who struggle with this disorder seem to have no connection with a dissatisfaction with one's body, nor an influence from social media. Next, we have avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. This disorder is a constant failure to meet your nutritional or energy needs. The side effects or symptoms of avoidant restrictive food intake disorder are weight loss, a nutritional deficiency, and it may also interrupt your social interaction. This disorder is triggered genetically or psychologically, and there are also many cases where it's sociocultural influences like the increased interest in the environmental impacts of food processes that can lead to this disorder. ARFID is commonly treated through oral nutritional substitutes or supplements, and similar to rumination disorder, there's no connection between a dissatisfaction with their body or an influence from social media. Moving on, we have pica. Pica is the uncontrollable urge to eat inedible foods, and the symptoms and side effects include stomach pains, bowel problems, as well as lead poisoning from the inedible objects eaten. Pica is normally prevalent in younger children or infants, and the triggers are still unknown. However, some research does point to it to being a side effect of anemia. Treatment for pica may vary depending on the age of the person afflicted. However, in younger children, it seems to be effective to have mild rewards for eating the right edible foods versus consequences for eating non-edible foods. Now we're going to talk about binge eating disorder. Binge eating disorder is the consumption of large amounts of food uncontrollably. Again, this disorder is not connected to an influence from social media or the dissatisfaction with one's body. Side effects and symptoms of this disorder include frequent dieting, a fear of eating in front of others, especially in public, and physical or psychological changes. Binge eating disorder can be triggered by a variety of things, the main ones being stress or anxiety. A common way to feel better is to consume food. However, when someone is afflicted with binge eating disorder, that desire is amplified and they can't stop once they have started to consume the food. Another trigger may be boredom. Someone struggling with this disorder will turn to food. And there are many other triggers such as childhood traumas and habits that can trigger binge eating disorder. Social eating, like going out for lunch with friends, may also be a trigger, and this can be treated through therapy, medications, or behavioral weight loss programs. Moving on, we have bulimia and anorexia. These are the two most commonly heard eating disorders, and both are the distortion of one's body and the obsessive desire to lose weight. However, those suffering from bulimia will, as seen to the image on the top to the right, binge eat for a limited amount of time and then feel extreme amounts of guilt or shame. There's also a large preoccupation with one's body weight or shape, and someone struggling with bulimia will purge or throw up their food after eating. They will also exercise an unhealthy amount and use diet pills to control their weight. They live in constant fear of gaining weight as well, similar to those who suffer with anorexia. However, if someone has anorexia, they will refuse to eat altogether and, like those struggling with bulimia, over-exercise. The side effects and symptoms of these two disorders are also very similar. They include extreme weight loss, an abnormal blood count like anemia, fatigue, insomnia, and dizziness. Social media has a large play in triggering these eating disorders because they are largely caused by dissatisfaction with one's body, which is normally due to the unrealistic expectations set by social media influencers, models, as well as societal standards. Pictures can be edited by a team of professionals to give the model a perfect body, and that's the only things shown. There are no flaws, which can trigger someone to feel as they need to look that flawless or skinny, and they are no longer satisfied with their body or their body shape, and they strive for the edited, photoshopped, and face-tuned version they see staring back at them, or whatever body type may be trending at the moment. A person suffering from anorexia or bulimia will refuse to eat or throw up their food in order to achieve a quote-unquote perfect body they think they do not have. Treatment for these disorders involves counseling, dietitians, and in extreme cases being sent to a rehabilitation center. There are many support groups available as well to help someone struggling through an eating disorder. Here's some statistics about eating disorders. At least 30 million people of all ages and genders suffer from an eating disorder in the United States. Eating disorders have the highest mortality rate of any mental illness, and 0.9% of American women will suffer from anorexia in their lifetime. 1 in 5 deaths by someone struggling with anorexia is by suicide, and 50 to 80% of bulimia and anorexia is genetic. Many eating disorders also come with a comorbid disorder like OCD or anxiety. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any more questions about eating disorders, as Jayanti mentioned, a list of resources will be sent out, along with a link to this video if you think you or someone you know may be struggling with an eating disorder. And here are our citations. Thank you.
Well done, Bonnie. Lots of great information, good resources. All right, okay. Our next presenter is Yash Mehta, and his group is going to be talking about addiction. You ready, Yash?
Yep. Thank you for the introduction, Jaya. Hi, everyone. As mentioned, I'm Yash Mehta, and I'll be presenting on issues surrounding addiction and substance abuse. Our research team consists of both youth board and youth council members. Our youth council members are Ayush, Ovia, Yug, Rishi, Anya, and not pictured is Vedant. Also pictured are YB's Priyal, Anya, and me. Substance and behavioral addiction is defined as a recurring desire to continue taking a substance or repeat certain behaviors despite harmful consequences. In fact, the National Survey on Drug Use and Health reported that in 2017, 19.7 million adults in the United States battled a substance use disorder. Some symptoms that someone struggling with a substance abuse problem would show are the need for more and more of a substance to get the desired effect, a continued use of a clinical drug after it is no longer needed for a health problem, dramatic changes in one's personality, or indulging in and continuing negative behaviors despite major losses in life, such as gambling, domestic abuse, and relationships. The use of social media can have a profound effect on substance use in teens. Social media is known for the glamorization of drug use and other destructive activities. This is commonly shown on the pages of popular rappers and artists who glorify the consumption of alcohol and marijuana. Most of these pages are run by successful people, so the connection between success and drug use can be made sometimes. A study conducted by the National Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse also found that teenagers that regularly use social media are more likely to buy tobacco and drink than teens that don't. However, I'm not telling you to stop using social media, rather just informing you of what is out there. Although social media can be a dangerous place for teens and those who are attempting to recover from their addiction, there are many emerging benefits of social media for recovery. A recent shift across many platforms has begun to produce media that prevents addiction. In 2015, the CDC used social media to promote the awareness of prescription drug addiction, launching a campaign called When the Prescription Becomes the Problem. And this campaign shared the stories of many who were affected by the addiction. Social media, at its core, was built to make connections, and a benefit of social media is that it is easier now than ever to have an active network to support you along your path to recovery. Another organization is Truth. Truth is a national campaign aimed at eliminating teen smoking in the United States. They have spent large sums of money advertising on platforms such as Instagram, Snapchat, and SoundCloud. Next, we will focus on a few drugs that are commonly abused and share some details about them. Heroin. The usage of heroin results in a long-term feeling of clouded thinking. The drug also leaves some people with a temporary feeling of depression, making them crave the drug again and forget these thoughts. In 2016, 1,000 teenagers used this drug, and 152,000 young adults also used heroin. It rewires the brain to create a tolerance, addiction, and can lead to dependence. Excessive drinking is responsible for more than 4,300 deaths under the age of 21 each year, and 12 to 20-year-olds drink 11% of all the alcohol in the United States annually. It is the most accessible substance for teens, making it easiest to abuse. And some consequences of underage drinking are school problems in regards to grade and attendance, a high risk of suicide, as well as other mental health issues. It also makes you vulnerable to binge drinking because impulse control has not yet matured. There is also a chance of irreversible brain damage, and it can affect memory and decision-making, even when not under influence. Some common reasons for underage drinking are that someone wants to fit in, peer pressure, or is sometimes perceived as cool. It is very important to seek out help in any situation surrounding underage drinking to stop future consequences. As students progress into high school and the stress of grades gets to them, the usage of study medications seem like a viable option to boost grades and feel smarter. And although they have temporary benefits such as an increase in energy, alertness, and focus, they have permanent side effects such as heart palpitations and extreme anxiety. Some drugs are Adderall, Ritalin, and Focalin, and there are many more, and they can cause aggressive addictions, negative reactions to high doses, as well as medical complications. And the annual misuse of this drug is 4%. However, during exam periods, it spikes nearly 25%. And the National Institute on Drug Abuse reports that students who abuse study drugs tend to have lower GPAs than those who don't. On top of everything mentioned before, other detrimental health effects are an increased blood pressure, decreased sleep, and an overall decline in health. The National Institute on Drug Abuse recently released data suggesting that 30% of marijuana users have some degree of marijuana use disorder. And similar to study medications, the stress of high school can lead many to turn to marijuana. It is the THC in this marijuana that stimulates the brain center which responds to pleasure. It can make you feel more relaxed, and most use it to relieve stress. And however, frequent use as an adolescent can lead to permanent changes in the brain that affect memory, attention, decision-making, as well as motivation. And other effects are that it also impairs learning and has a direct link to declines in IQ upon chronic use. It can also cause hallucinations if used in large amounts, which leads to decreased judgments as well as senses. Nicotine creates temporary pleasant feelings in the body and mind, and when you use tobacco, your brain releases neurotransmitters such as dopamine, the feel-good chemical. Nearly 23% of high school students use tobacco products, and some of the symptoms of a nicotine addiction can include going out of your way to acquire tobacco and nicotine, a desire to keep smoking even when health complications arise, and the continued use of products even after it negatively impacts your life. Some negative effects of nicotine are that it can lead to an addiction, as the risk of becoming a lifelong smoker increases as you expose your body to more of the harmful chemicals in tobacco products. It also becomes harder to concentrate, learn, and control impulses, directly impacting your education experience. And there are many great possibilities of long-term damage to brain development and respiratory health. Other than substances, some common addictions are social media, shopping, gambling, video games, food, as well as sugar. Although it may seem difficult or nearly impossible in some cases to escape from substance abuse, there are many resources and coping mechanisms. Some coping skills are to be honest with yourself and others, seek out help and accept it when offered, learn to relax in any situation, exercise regularly, and turn to meditation. As also, therapists and the people you are surrounded by are great personal resources that can help make a difference in the way you tackle your addiction. The pairing of coping mechanisms and the proper use of resources can greatly help one escape from their addiction. In addition to the treatment options listed on the slide, some other resources are rehabilitation, family and friends that will support you and keep you accountable, smartphone apps, as well as national and local helplines, such as the ones listed on the slide. You never have to face these problems alone, and seeking help is in fact one of the most courageous things to do. Here's a list of the sources that we all used to create this presentation, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Yash. Well done. Our next presenter on the group is Annika Singh, and they're talking about peer relationships. Are you ready, Annika?
Yes, thank you so much for the introduction, Auntie. So my group researched peer relationships and their importance throughout life. So first I'll introduce my research team. So it consisted of our YOs, Javier, Sean, Mira, Palash, Saira, YCs Anshul, Arya, Nilakshi, Jasleen, Shivani, Manan, and YBs, myself, Atul, Pari, and Jared. So first we'll touch on the social identity theory. And so we often say that feeling like you fit in is very important. And this theory stems from the social identity theory, which starts with the assertion that people are able to think and feel and act not only as individuals, but also as part of a larger group. So this theory suggests that when we see ourselves as part of a group, we're more open-minded to see other perspectives, get influenced, and trust other group members. So we can see examples of this playing out throughout history as we tend to find strength in numbers, and even right now where we choose to do group projects with colleagues. So being part of a group is linked to your overall well-being and health, as we'll see in later slides. So next, I'm going to touch on two separate studies that show us the importance of peer relationships at school and then later on in work. So according to a study from the University of Virginia that looked at 169 adolescents over 10 years, your high school relationships are actually really important and play a big part in your long and short-term physical and emotional wellness. So the main takeaways from this study was that the participants with a few tight-knit friends had lower social anxiety and fewer symptoms of depression, while those who were considered more popular didn't have as many close friends, showed higher levels of social anxiety. So this study, among others, indicates that friendships reduce stress, help you cope with trauma, and encourage you to make better lifestyle choices. Now, the second study will talk more about how peer relationships are really important in the workplace. And in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology Review, we see the concrete evidence of this phenomena as people with better work relations and have better health and happiness and are less likely to burn out. So people who identify more strongly with their colleagues and their organizations had greater psychological and physical health. So having and maintaining these good relationships is also better to the overall efficiency of your team, because when you get along with your peers, you'll often see greater working success. So let's move on to the examples and impacts of peer relations. So as children, we often bond over common activities, but as teens and young adults, this tends to expand to include values, attitudes, and activities. But as we have new experiences, we are often exposed to higher amounts of peer pressure, as our groups and our friends pressure us into doing things that go against your beliefs and values. So oftentimes this pressure becomes extremely toxic and people start to change the way they look and act to fit in. But it's important to realize that your relationship should be helping you, not hindering your growth as an individual. So romantic relationships. So we'll go over a few ground rules to have healthy relationships and then signs of unhealthy relationships. So under the few ground rules, having respect, fairness, and equality are all important, as these ensure that the relationship is helping you grow and you have an equal stake in it. And having a social life outside of your relationship is also pretty beneficial because it can be detrimental to do everything with your partner. And signs of an unhealthy relationship include dishonesty or unequal control, because it leads to lack of trust and one partner making most of the decisions. So coping mechanisms for abusive relationships. So as a victim or someone helping a victim, there are 3 key things to remember when helping people. Firstly, that victims of abuse often blame themselves and try to fix themselves when they're not the problem. So as somebody helping a victim, it's important to reassure them that they're not the problem and they don't need to be fixing anything. Second, abusers are violent people and should not be confronted, because this can often lead to more unwanted violence. And lastly, the best way to help a victim is to help them find a way out of the relationship for good. And suggesting therapy is often important because abuse can be a traumatic experience. So effects of social media. So social media is known to be misused so that these online apps become toxic, but it's important to realize that social media is imperative to staying connected and maintaining good social emotional health. So while high amounts of social media have shown correlations with loneliness and depression, avoiding social media is rarely the solution. Rather, a reasonable use of it is recommended. So as teens nowadays use social media more and more frequently, it's just important to make sure that we're not consumed by it. So getting help for peer pressure. So there's 3 large categories that we can categorize our methods of getting help. First, obviously getting help. Second, communication. And 3, removing sources of peer pressure. So under the getting help category, talking to therapists, counselors, friends, or family are all really important, because this is known to alleviate stress and improve mental health. And then under communication, firstly, having an emergency code with your parents that lets them know that you need an out of a situation can be really helpful when you're being pressured into doing something and you have no one to turn to. And then second, just talking to the person who is pressuring you and addressing the situation head on can sometimes be effective as well. And under the last category, removing sources of peer pressure, we have 2 points. Firstly, blocking people on social media that promote peer pressure or taking a break from social media can both be effective ways to control your social media usage. And second, to avoid this issue in the first place, having friends with similar values and beliefs can help you avoid situations of peer pressure. So these are our hotline resources. They include both statewide and nationwide resources, and some of them only run from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., but they're always good resources to reach out to if you're struggling. And these are the sources that my team used for our research. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Annika and team. Nicely done. All right. I really appreciate the code word thing. I think that's so important to be able to exit. Our next presenter is Mahima Joshi, and their group is presenting on identity.
Thank you for the introduction, Auntie. Everyone, my name is Mahima, and I will be presenting about identity, specifically focusing on the LGBTQ+ community, racism, and cultural stereotypes. So this presentation was compiled by all 3 parts of the Youth Leadership Program. Our names are Mahima, Ronan, Anika, Sujay, Manav, Vihan, Rishi, Sachi, Kamya, Suraj, Dia, Nikita, Anya, Anvika, and not pictured is Anirudh. So to begin, we'll be talking about LGBT community. So identity is basically who you are to yourself and to the world, and LGBTQ+ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, and more, which would include pansexual, agender, etc. Although most of the LGBTQ community believes society has become more accepting of them in the past decade, there is still room for a lot of growth. Most of the LGBTQ youth have been subject to slurs or jokes based solely on their gender identity or sexual orientation. We can see a direct link of how these slurs can negatively impact mental health, causing fairly higher statistics of youth in the LGBTQ community considering suicide or being diagnosed with mental health disorders. However, there are many resources to reach out to. The Trevor Project is an organization focused on suicide prevention in the LGBTQ youth. Other resources include hotlines specific to assisting the LGBT community and other national hotlines. Lastly, the most important resource is just someone you trust. This could be a friend, part of your family, a school counselor, doctor, or support group. It is also crucial to remember that whichever struggle you're facing, you are not alone. And here's a video to demonstrate this.
I've attempted suicide 4 times. It can be scary, and it's really hard to deal with, and people look at you like you're not worth it.
Queer youth are more susceptible to mental illness because of all the varying pressures around them, the lack of acceptance depending on their orientation, their gender identity.
Mental health, it's one of those hush-hush topics. Nobody really wants to talk about it, and they don't really understand it.
It's hard and it's scary to admit, not just to others, but especially to yourself, that you need help.
So if you see someone in the LGBT community, especially youth struggling, you have to validate their experiences and then help them along the process that they wish to take.
To any LGBTQ youth out there who are struggling with their mental health, the best thing I can say is take your time.
You have a right to get the help that you need and that you deserve.
Find someone you can trust. Find someone you can talk to.
So next, we will discuss how race can affect a person's mental health. So what actually is racism? It's quite simple. It's just discrimination against a different race based on the belief that one's own race is more superior. Some examples of racist behavior include a business not serving someone solely based on their race or failing to hire someone based on their race. It's really important for us to remember that racism is still an extremely prevalent issue to this day. Police brutality against Black people based only on their skin color is seen through the civil rights violation, where officers exercise excessive force against a subject. There have been many victims of this, but 2 names you may recognize are George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, who sparked a new wave of protests around the world. Black Lives Matter is a global movement that was founded in 2013 in response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin, a young Black man who was shot's murderer. The main goal of this movement is to work to live in a world where Black lives are not systematically targeted. It is known as a rallying cry for all Black lives striving for liberation. Protests for the equality of Black lives have been occurring since the 1960s and are still ongoing to this day. Now, as we know, social media has made its way into all of our lives in some way or another. It also has an influence on racism. Hateful comments that are made behind a screen may not personally impact those who are leaving the comments. However, they do affect those about whom the comments are being made. It is crucial to remember now more than ever that racism does still exist. On social media, we often see racism towards many, many different groups. However, we also see youth taking responsibility and action against racism by spreading petitions, educational links, information, and places to donate. Aggression, like prejudicial statements, violence, bullying, and harassment, serve as direct links to mental health problems. Not only this, but victimization, which is when people are singled out for cruel behavior, cruel treatment, can undermine the strength and will of the targeted race. Additionally, minorities, especially youth who experience racism, can feel extreme fear and anxiety, which oftentimes develop into mental health problems. So it is up to us to work to make a change. When you see racist behavior in person, speak up. You can say something like, just leave him or her alone. Make sure the target is okay and get help if you need it. When you see racist behavior online, say something. Make sure to be kind and try to educate others. Be sure to report racist behavior online because it does make a difference. The last thing we will be talking about is cultural stereotypes. So cultural stereotypes are the shared beliefs of perceivers about the characteristics of a target group based on ethnic group, religion, or culture. Of course, as you may assume, social media has a huge impact on stereotypes as well. There are some positives, like the power of social media to change common misconceptions and spread awareness. However, the extreme negatives include the tearing down of other cultures or the creation of bad impressions of other cultures. It is so important to remember that a stereotype does not define you. We cannot let what makes us unique tear us apart, and we have to remember not to confine ourselves within the wall of what society says we should be. That's it for this presentation, and here are our sources, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mahima and group. Really well done. Our last and final group is Karina Sika, and the group is talking about family dynamics. Are you ready, Karina?
Yes, thank you so much, Auntie. So on this presentation, I've worked with all three parts of the Youth Leadership Board, including Ari, Avni, Ishan, Ria, Angad, Anushka, Amara, Rishi, Samay, Shivraj, Yash, and not pictured, Arnav and Neha. To start off, I'd like to define family dynamics, which is basically the patterns of relations or interactions in your family. Our first topic is going to be family rules, which are the different influences in families that often give structure to each individual's lifestyle. A very powerful influence in many families is religion. Many religions present the rights and wrongs for parents and kids, such as what foods you should eat, what social obligations you should attend to, and can act as a sort of guidelines for these important decisions. However, many kids often develop lives and habits beyond their religion, and they might decide to stop some traditions, which can be a source of dispute and argument between them and their parents. Additionally, finances are also very influential in one's lifestyle. Of course, each family handles money differently, so some kids get allowances while others are a little more independent and get jobs. And no matter how your family decides to handle the money, it can be something that children feel defined by and can be a source of stress, bullying, and emotional strain. We'll discuss how to cope with these stressors later in the presentation. Another important aspect of family dynamics are the relationship between children and parents, as well as the standards that are set for children. Many kids often feel like their parents place an enormous amount of stress and pressure on them regarding things like grades, extracurricular, and social life. This is often because parents have their own ideals and priorities in life that they wish to pass on to their children with great intentions. However, these intentions may not align with the kid's own idea for their life and intentions. For example, parents may want their kids to focus on school, whereas kids may want to spend more time with their friends. When parents set these unrealistic expectations, they're more likely to have frequent arguments with their kids. It's important to consider that there can be large mental, social, and physical consequences for the developing teenager when they deal with this large amount of stress. For example, they may have sleep disturbances, are at a higher risk for developing depression, anxiety, or partaking in self-harm. And additionally, this high-stress environment can lead them to develop insecurities and lose motivation and confidence in their work. To cope with these high-stress circumstances, it's important to develop clear communication strategies in your family so that you can understand each perspective from parents to kids. An effective strategy for this is to use I statements to healthfully share your emotions without casting blame on anyone. For example, you can say, "I feel this way because blank." Also, it's important for students to prioritize their own mental health, whether it's taking a personal me day or hanging out with friends just to give your mind some rest. Additionally, setting SMART goals, which are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based, can be a positive motivator to keep kids on track with things such as school, while also showing their parents that they're reaching their full potential. Finally, talking to friends, family, and counselors can be a great outlet to discuss stresses in your life, and writing is another fantastic alternative so you can jot down thoughts that may be accumulating in your brain and adding to your stress. A last detail on this topic. When families are going through these times of dispute and stress, often social media, such as Instagram, Snapchat, or TikTok, can serve as an escape for kids to relax, connect with their friends, and escape their arguments. However, the downsides of this are that kids are less connected with the real world, including their parents, which can certainly weaken their family bond. It's important that we use social media healthfully, don't build reliances, and watch our screen time. Finally, our last common issue that families face today, which have profound impacts on parents and their relationship with children, are divorce and dissolutions. First, we need to understand the basic similarities and differences between these two terms. They are both methods for ending a marriage, and they both involve resolving conflicts such as child custody, the division of property, and handling debts. The main difference between these two terms is that in divorce, one party is often found at fault, so there is a need for court involvement. However, in dissolution, no one is really at fault. An example of this is when a spouse passes away. Divorce and dissolution place children and parents in very difficult situations. The kids are vulnerable for developing depression, anxiety, PTSD, and emotional stress, as well as having a lower level of social well-being. To ease this situation, parents should maintain strong relationships with their kids and partake in enjoyable activities with them. This is important because from a child's perspective, they are losing their sense of belonging and roots in their family. Thus, it's important to reaffirm these roots so they don't become more anxious and worried about having a home. Parents should also be responsible for keeping their children informed about everything that's going on in the family, and also kids should be given the opportunity to ask questions. Something kids can also do is talk to their friends and family about the situation, because these are the people that ultimately know you best and can give you specific personal advice on how to handle the situation, cope with stress, or point you towards a professional who can. Support groups are also very beneficial because it allows kids to talk with others who have been in their shoes and show them that they're not alone. They'll also become exposed to other coping strategies that could benefit them. To conclude our presentation, we have some resources for teen to use. TeenLink and Crisis Connection are great platforms for teens to share and express their feelings to other teens that are willing to listen and give advice and resources. Additionally, Youth Eastside Services is a great organization that supports families going through these difficult times. Of course, the NAMI helpline also offers resources, and your school or professional counselor for kids is a very, very good resource to turn to. Here are the sources we used, and that concludes our presentation. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Karina and team. Well done on that presentation. So at this time, we've had a couple of questions that have come in. I'm just going to read some of the things that came in just to the panelist group, to all the attendees, so everyone can be aware of the questions that came in. And I also want to invite people to ask questions now if they have any, things have maybe settled in a little bit more, maybe things are popping in and you have some questions for any of the groups. So this is a time to ask some questions. So there's a comment here that I want to read. This is from Beeps M. This was a comment to Mrs. Balducci. I'm just going to read this out. Says, I'm disappointed to hear you talk about cutting funding to social services. Yes, it's true. There is going to be a huge budget shortfall due to the coronavirus pandemic, but there's also a racial pandemic going on. And one of the leading asks through these resistance movements is cut funding to law enforcement and direct funds more to social services, especially being present when SPD flash bombed and pepper sprayed us. I expect more. Sorry, I lost my track here. I expect better from the state in every city. I keep losing my place. I'm so sorry. This is hard with the chat box here. Essentially, the point being that we're in a racial pandemic at the moment, and cuts to social services is not very supportive. It's fine to be talking about mental health, but it's time to put our money where our mouth is, and a lot of that lies with our legislators. So I think the point that this attendee is making is that mental health is very much connected to racism. So thank you for that comment, Beeps M. There was a question from Pragna Joshi, is bipolar disorder hereditary? Is there a chemical imbalance? Our Disha responded and said there is some evidence to suggest that it is heritable because 2/3 of people with bipolar disorder have a close relative with the disorder or with unipolar depression. I just wanted to add that the research shows that if one parent has bipolar disorder, there's 15 to 30% chance that a child can have bipolar disorder. If both parents have it, there's a 50 to 75% chance. The onset is also, I believe, earlier if a parent has it. So that's something. And then there was another question from Pragna Joshi on what are some resources for older generations from our culture to understand more about sexual orientation? Thank you for that question. Love that. Definitely having an open, and Mahima, who responded with definitely having an open discussion with youth. Ask them questions you may have, because at this point in time, youth are one of the biggest resources to use. There are also resources online that can definitely help. Nikhil will be setting that out. There's also tons of documentaries out there. I'm hoping that some of the resources you send will include that. Any other questions? We have a couple of minutes for that from the attendees. Any other comments, please pop them in the chat box. There's a wealth of information and knowledge in this group. I know we're in a very historical moment right now where, you know, there's Black Lives Matter, the deaths of our Black siblings that are happening, and racism is a mental health crisis. So you are all presenting on that ground, right? So definitely making that connection. Is sexual orientation by choice? I would like to, before I respond to that, I would like to turn it over to the group. Or is there a hormone difference?
I think I might be wrong about this because this isn't specifically what we research. I believe that it is not a choice because it's just like love is just love, and it can be like just who you're sexually attracted to. It doesn't really it's not a choice.
Yeah. You know, I'm not able to do this right now, Mahima. I'm wondering if you can put a link to that. There's something called a gender unicorn. If you can find a quick image of that and stick it in for people to look up, it really beautifully explains the difference between identity and feelings and sexual orientation, and just how that is all just different. Like we know we can express ourselves differently in terms of gender, but then we can have sexual feelings towards someone, like and that can be expressed differently. But then we could be assigned male or female at birth, and so there's a whole variation in all of that. So it's called Gender Unicorn, and I think that's a really good resource. And then Bipasha asked, can you talk about the model minority myth and the South Asian community also being quite racist? Sure. That is, yes, Bipasha, I can take that on. So briefly, as South Asians, one of the things that white supremacy did was, for us, it's a divide and conquer model, right? Which they basically constructed this ideology that South Asians are the good minorities, right? They said, you all work hard, you all, don't really rock the boat, right? And so what that did was it created bad people of color, which was the Black people, and it divided up our struggles. In reality, all our struggles, right? Like, instead of having us work together, it divided up our struggles. And so this idea that we're good POC is actually really problematic, right? It keeps us away from our Black siblings. It keeps us away from their liberation. And so by not challenging any systemic racism that is out there, but continuing to uphold whiteness in the ways that we work hard, or don't challenge any institutional racism, it actually keeps Black people down. So that's like a quick and dirty version of it. And there's tons of really good stuff out there that I'm happy to share resources on how model minority myth is very dangerous. I don't know if Lalita or Anu want to share more. Lalita, great job. Okay, there's a lot of great jobs for all of you, which I concur. Okay, thank you, Mahima, for putting on that gender unicorn. I have a generic, how is mental illness handled within IAWW? Okay, I'm gonna leave that to Anu and Lalita.
I just wanted Lalita to talk about as the organization, how it's handled. But within the youth program, we do receive some concerns, and we put them with refer them to either therapists or psychiatrists that we work with. So Jaya is we collaborate with Jaya a lot on that as well. And then we do send them links to or information resources for Yes and NAMI and some other resources that are available for them to talk to depending on the situation. And how is it perceived? We are, we are trying our best to bring the conversations to families and the community. And so we always, we're open to those conversations. We have webinars on battling this, and also making sure everyone realizes that it is something we need to have conversations around. And IAWW and the youth program's mission is to remove the stigma with mental health. And so we've really worked hard on that. And there's a lot of webinars that are coming up related to that from IAWW itself.
I'd also say, like to add on within YB, over the past couple of years, we've had like in multiple meetings, especially last year and this year, we've had people in person and on Zoom. Like we've talked to counselors and like experts in certain fields, whether it's a counselor from the Youth Eastside Services or like Jayanti has come on to our calls as well. Like last year, we had a session on like racism and like in the community and how you can like address it and talk to people. And then when Jayanti came on a couple times this year, we talked about like, you know, as like youth leaders, our mental conditions during the pandemic, being stuck at home and stuff like that. And so like within the youth programs, we also have a lot of like direct communication between the youth teams and professionals. So I think within the program, it's also like a constant conversation that we keep up.
Thank you, Cameron, for that. Yeah, so it is a topic that we talk about a lot, and especially with the advocacy work that all the youth have been doing, we have been bringing it up a lot within the program itself.
Well, for one, I think, you know, IAWW is doing such a great job really addressing this issue head on. And I think the youth are really, you all are just the leaders, you know, and so I'm so glad that you are taking this on and thinking about it, delving deep into this. And the thing that I will add to this is that it isn't just like information, right? It is also the critical thinking about how all of these things are connected institutionally and systemically, and piecing all that together too, right? So you have a big task ahead of you, and I am really proud of the work you've done. So keep at it. And I'm glad to support you and to be along for the ride with you.